Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Rachel Rogers, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania, last winter. The coffee in my thermos had long gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, desperate for any semblance of warmth. The Allegheny Mountains stretched before me, beautiful and unforgiving in their winter coat. My breaths puffed out in small clouds as I adjusted my backpack and checked my map one more time. "We're making good time," I said to Dakota, my German shepherd. He perked his ears at the sound of my voice but kept his vigilant gaze on the trail ahead. Dakota had been my loyal companion for 6 years, ever since my divorce from Eric. The dog had been the one non-negotiable item in our settlement, and thankfully Eric didn't fight me on it. This solo winter camping trip was meant to be therapeutic, a chance to prove to myself that I could thrive on my own after years of dependency. My therapist, Dr. Wallace, had suggested exposure therapy to help with my anxiety, though I doubt she meant for me to expose myself to the harshest elements of the Pennsylvania wilderness in January. The trail to Minister Creek was supposed to be moderate difficulty, but the recent snowfall had obscured many of the markers. Still, I had researched extensively, packed appropriately, and even left a detailed itinerary with my sister Melissa. 3 days of solitude was exactly what I needed to clear my head. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened considerably. The weather forecast had predicted light flurries, but the heavy gray clouds rolling in suggested something more severe. I needed to set up camp before the weather turned. Dakota seemed to sense my unease, staying closer to my side than usual. "Just a bit further, buddy," I assured him, though I was really talking to myself. "There should be a clearing near Rimrock Overlook." The wind picked up, whistling through the bare branches of the trees. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and despite my layers, I could feel the cold beginning to seep into my bones. Dakota whined softly, his head turning to look behind us. "What is it, boy?" I turned, scanning the trail we had just traveled. Nothing moved except the swaying branches and falling snow. But there was something off. A stillness that felt unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shook off the feeling. My anxiety was playing tricks on me again, and this was exactly why I needed this trip, to prove that not every unsettling feeling was a premonition of doom. We pushed forward for another mile until I found a suitable clearing. It was relatively sheltered by a semicircle of dense pines, offering some protection from the wind. I worked quickly to set up my tent, my fingers growing numb despite my gloves. Dakota paced the perimeter of our camp, occasionally stopping to sniff the air. With the tent secured, I gathered what firewood I could find. Most was damp from snow, but I managed to find enough dry kindling under the dense brush. Years of camping with my father had taught me how to start a fire in almost any condition. Within minutes, a small flame flickered to life, and I carefully fed it until it grew strong enough to ward off some of the cold. Night fell quickly in the winter forest. By 6 o'clock, it was pitch black beyond the circle of my fire's light. I sat close to the flames, Dakota pressed against my side as I ate a simple dinner of dehydrated stew. The silence was absolute, except for the crack and pop of the fire and the occasional distant call of an owl. The stillness was unsettling. In all my previous camping trips, the forest had been alive with sounds. Insects, animals, the rustle of leaves. But here, now, it was as if all living things had retreated, leaving only Dakota and me in a void of white snow and black shadows. I was about to retreat to my tent when Dakota's ears suddenly pricked up. He raised his head, nose twitching, and let out a low growl that I felt more than heard. "What's wrong?" I whispered, instantly alert. Dakota rarely growled unless there was good reason. Then I heard it, a branch snapping in the darkness beyond our camp. Could be anything, I told myself. A deer, a raccoon. Nothing to get worked up about. Another snap, closer this time. Dakota was on his feet now, his body tense, facing the direction of the sound. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. "Is someone there?" No response came, but the sensation of being watched intensified. I reached for my hiking stick, gripping it tightly. "I have a dog," I announced, as if that would deter whoever or whatever might be lurking in the shadows. The fire popped loudly, sending sparks into the night air. In that brief flare of light, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Tall, impossibly thin, gone so quickly I couldn't be sure I'd seen anything at all. Dakota's growl deepened, the hair along his spine standing on end. "It's okay," I said, not believing my own words. "Probably just an animal." But what kind of animal would be out in this cold, watching us? I added more wood to the fire, building it higher than was strictly necessary. The dancing flames provided both warmth and the illusion of safety. I decided we would sleep outside the tent tonight, close to the fire. I couldn't shake the feeling that putting a thin layer of nylon between us and whatever was out there would be a mistake. He unrolled my sleeping bag next to the fire and settled in, one hand buried in Dakota's fur. His body remained tense, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond our camp. It took hours for exhaustion to finally overcome my fear, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I awoke to silence. Complete, absolute silence. The fire had died to embers, casting just enough light to see that dawn was still hours away, and Dakota was gone. "Dakota!" I sat up quickly, my sleeping bag falling away. The cold hit me immediately, but panic overrode discomfort. "Dakota!" My voice echoed through the trees and returned to me, unanswered. I scrambled for my headlamp, clicking it on and sweeping its beam across the campsite. Dakota's paw prints led away from camp, into the trees. Without thinking, I pulled on my boots and coat and followed the tracks. They were clear in the fresh snow, moving in a straight line away from the safety of our camp. Why would he leave? Dakota was too well trained to wander off without reason. The tracks led me deeper into the forest, away from the trail. The trees grew denser, the spaces between them narrower. My headlamp created shifting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I called Dakota's name repeatedly, my voice growing more desperate with each unanswered call. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, I spotted something ahead, a dark shape against the snow. Relief flooded through me. "Dakota, thank God, you scared me half to death." But as I drew closer, my relief curdled into confusion, then horror. It wasn't Dakota at all, but a deer, or what remained of one. The animal lay splayed on the snow, its body torn open from throat to belly. The blood looked black in the beam of my headlamp, steaming slightly in the cold air. This kill was fresh. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. What could have done this? A bear? But bears were in hibernation this time of year. Wolves? There hadn't been wolves in this part of Pennsylvania for decades. A low whine broke through my panic. A familiar sound. "Dakota!" I swung my light toward the sound. Dakota stood about 20 feet away, his posture submissive, ears flat against his head. He whined again, but didn't approach me. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, back into the darkness, then at me again. He was trying to tell me something. "Come here, boy," I whispered, afraid to raise my voice. "Come on." He took a few hesitant steps toward me, then froze, his gaze fixed on something behind me. Before I could turn, I felt it. A presence, a shift in the air, the inexplicable certainty that I was no longer alone. Slowly, I turned. Nothing, just trees and snow and shadows. But the feeling remained, crawling along my skin like ice water. I swept my light in a wide arc, illuminating nothing but the winter forest. "Let's go," I said to Dakota, my voice shaking. "Now." This time he obeyed, trotting to my side. Together we retreated, following our tracks back to camp. Every few steps I would turn, shining my light behind us, expecting to see something, anything, that would explain the sensation of being stalked. When we finally reached our camp, I rebuilt the fire with trembling hands, making it larger than before. Dakota wouldn't leave my side now, pressing against me as if seeking protection as much as offering it. The rest of the night passed in a state of hypervigilance. I couldn't sleep, even as exhaustion pulled at my consciousness. Each time my eyelids would begin to droop, some sound, real or imagined, would jerk me back to alertness. Dakota was equally restless, his head rising at every whisper of wind, every crack of cold, brittle wood. By the time dawn finally broke, casting weak gray light through the trees, I had made my decision. We were leaving. 3 days of solitude no longer seemed therapeutic. It felt like a death sentence. I packed up camp as quickly as my cold, stiffened fingers would allow. My tent, still covered in a thin layer of overnight snow, seemed to resist my efforts, as if the forest itself wanted to keep me there. As I worked, Dakota kept watch, his gaze constantly sweeping our surroundings. Twice he growled at something I couldn't see, and each time I would pause, heart pounding, until he relaxed again. With the tent finally packed away, I shouldered my backpack and checked my map. The quickest way back to the trailhead was to continue along Minister Creek, following it downstream until it met the main trail. It would be a long day of hiking, but if we maintained a good pace, we could reach my car before nightfall. "Come on, boy," I said, setting off. "Let's go home." Dakota followed reluctantly, continually looking back the way we had come. His uncharacteristic behavior only reinforced my decision to leave. The day was clear but bitterly cold. The snow from the night before had left about 3 inches on the ground, making the going slower than I had hoped. Each step required careful placement to avoid slipping on hidden rocks or roots. By noon, we had made decent progress, covering perhaps half the distance back to the trailhead. I stopped to eat a quick lunch, an energy bar and some beef jerky, which I shared with Dakota. As we sat on a fallen log, I finally began to relax. In the daylight, my fears from the previous night seemed almost silly. A deer killed by natural predators, shadows playing tricks in the firelight, my own anxiety manufacturing danger where none existed. But Dakota remained on edge, eating his share of jerky without enthusiasm, his eyes constantly moving. "It's okay," I told him, scratching behind his ears. "We'll be back at the car in a few hours, then a hot shower and real food, I promise." We continued our journey, the path gradually widening as we approached more frequently traveled areas of the forest. I began to feel foolish for cutting my trip short. What would I tell Melissa? That I got spooked by the dark? That Dakota saw something in the woods? She would never let me live it down. As if reading my thoughts, Dakota suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. A deep growl rumbled from his chest, his hackles rising. "What is it?" I asked, scanning the trail ahead. Then I saw him, a man standing in the middle of the path about 50 yards ahead. The sight of another human should have been reassuring, but something about his stillness sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was dressed inappropriately for the weather, just jeans and a flannel shirt, no coat or gloves visible. His back was to us and he seemed to be staring at something in the trees. "Hello?" I called, my voice carrying easily in the cold air. The man didn't respond or move. "Excuse me?" I tried again, louder this time. "Are you okay?" Slowly, so slowly it seemed unnatural, the man turned. Even at this distance I could see that something was wrong. His movements were jerky, like a marionette controlled by an unpracticed puppeteer. When he fully faced me, I could see his eyes, blank, glazed, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Dakota's growl deepened and he positioned himself in front of me protectively. The man took a step forward, then another. His gait was wrong, stilted and awkward, as if he had forgotten how to walk properly. As he drew closer, I could see his face more clearly. His skin was pale to the point of being gray. his lips blue with cold. Yet he showed no signs of discomfort, no shivering, no huddling against the bitter wind that whipped through the trees. "Are you hurt?" I called, concern momentarily overriding my fear. "Do you need help?" He stopped about 20 feet away from us. Up close, I could see that his flannel shirt was stained with something dark. Blood. His eyes, which had seemed merely vacant from a distance, now appeared completely devoid of anything I would recognize as human awareness. "I'm Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Dakota. Can you tell me your name?" The man's head tilted at an unnatural angle. His mouth opened, but what came out wasn't a voice. It was a sound that didn't belong in a human throat. A high, keening wail that started softly and rose in volume until it seemed to fill the entire forest. Dakota barked frantically in response, backing up against my legs. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. The man, if he was still a man, advanced. With each step, his body seemed to change, elongating, his limbs stretching impossibly, fingers extending into something like claws. "Stay back!" I shouted, fumbling for my hiking stick, holding it out like a weapon. The thing that had been a man stopped. Its head tilted again, now at an angle that would have broken a normal neck. The wailing ceased, replaced by a clicking sound like bones knocking together. Then it spoke, its voice a rasping whisper that somehow carried over the wind. "Rachel," it said, my name sounding wrong in its mouth. "Rachel Rogers." Ice flooded my veins. I had told it my name just moments ago, but hearing it spoken back to me in that inhuman voice sent terror coursing through me like an electric current. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, though my throat had gone dry with fear. The thing stretched its lips into what might have been an attempt at a smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "Hungry," it said. "So hungry." Dakota lunged forward, barking furiously. The creature hissed, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve, and retreated a step. My brave dog had bought us an opportunity, and I seized it. "Run!" I shouted, turning to flee. Dakota followed, and together we sprinted back the way we had come. I could hear it behind us. Not footsteps, but a strange scuttling sound, like too many limbs moving over the frozen ground. I didn't dare look back, focusing only on the path ahead, on not tripping, on putting as much distance as possible between us and whatever was pursuing us. The trail forked up ahead. I veered left without thinking, away from the path that would eventually lead to the trailhead. All that mattered now was escaping. Dakota kept pace beside me, no longer barking but running with the single-minded focus of an animal fleeing a predator. The forest grew denser as we ran, the trees closing in around us. Branches clawed at my clothes, scratched my face. My lungs burned with exertion and cold air, but the sounds of pursuit didn't fade. If anything, they grew closer. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The thing was no longer even remotely human in shape. It moved on all fours, but its limbs were wrong. Too long, too jointed, its back hunched and elongated. Its head, still recognizable as the man's but stretched and distorted, was turned up to the sky, nostrils flaring as it tracked our scent. A wendigo. The word surfaced from some half-remembered campfire story, a Native American legend about a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, turning them into cannibalistic monsters that hungered endlessly. I had always dismissed such stories as myths designed to warn against the dangers of winter starvation or cannibalism. I was no longer so sure. My foot caught on a buried root, and I went down hard, landing face first in the snow. Dakota stopped immediately, rushing back to me, whining anxiously. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. The wendigo had gained on us. It crouched not 20 feet away, its misshapen body quivering with what might have been anticipation. "Dakota, go!" I shouted, but my loyal dog refused to leave my side. The wendigo rose up on its hind legs, now towering at least 8 feet tall. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with elongated fingers tipped with claws that looked capable of ripping through flesh with terrifying ease. Its chest heaved, not with exertion but with that same horrible hunger reflected in its milky eyes. I backed away slowly, one hand on Dakota's collar. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I had nothing that could serve as a weapon except my hiking stick, which now seemed laughably inadequate against this nightmare creature. The wendigo took a step toward us, then another. Its movements were more fluid now, as if it had fully settled into its transformed state. Up close, I could smell it, a sickly sweet odor of rot and decay that made my stomach heave. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Hungry," it said again, the word now barely recognizable as human speech. In that moment, Dakota broke free from my grip and lunged at the creature, teeth bared. He caught the wendigo's forearm in his powerful jaws, and the monster let out a shriek of rage and pain. "Dakota, no!" I screamed, but it was too late. The wendigo swung its free arm, catching Dakota mid-body and sending him flying into a tree trunk with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground and didn't move. "No!" Rage overtook fear, and I charged forward, swinging my hiking stick with all my strength. It connected with the wendigo's head, snapping with the force of the impact but eliciting another shriek from the creature. It reeled back, more in surprise than pain, giving me just enough time to dart past it toward Dakota. My dog lay motionless on the snow, a dark stain spreading beneath him. I fell to my knees beside him, hands hovering over his body, afraid to touch him, to confirm what I already knew. "Dakota," I whispered, tears freezing on my cheeks. "Please." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on me for just a moment. His tail thumped weakly against the snow, once, twice, then stillness. Behind me, the wendigo recovered, advancing again. I remained kneeling beside Dakota, grief momentarily overriding even my instinct for survival. What was the point of running now? The creature loomed over me, its shadow falling across Dakota's body and my own. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, a new sound cut through the winter air. Voices, human voices, and the barking of dogs. "Over here! I heard something!" The wendigo's head snapped up, its attention diverted. It let out a low hiss, backing away from me. I opened my eyes to see it retreating into the deeper forest, its movements once again jerky and uncertain. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The voice was closer now. "Here!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "I'm here!" Through my tears, I saw figures emerging from the trees. 3 people in the red jackets of forest rangers, accompanied by 2 search and rescue dogs. The wendigo had completely disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The lead ranger, a woman with a weathered face and kind eyes, knelt beside me. Her name tag read Martinez. "My dog," I managed to say. "It killed my dog." Ranger Martinez looked at Dakota, then back at me, her expression grave. "What happened? Were you attacked by an animal?" I opened my mouth to tell her about the wendigo, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I had seen? Who would believe me? I don't know," I said finally. "It happened so fast. It might have been a bear." A lie, but more believable than the truth. One of the other rangers, a young man with Whitaker on his jacket, examined Dakota briefly. "Doesn't look like a bear attack," he said quietly to Martinez. "The injuries are strange." "How did you find me?" I asked, changing the subject. "Your sister reported you missing when you didn't check in last night," Martinez explained. "And we've had reports of unusual activity in this area recently. Another hiker went missing last week." I thought of the man in the flannel shirt, his vacant eyes, his body transforming into something inhuman. Had he been a hiker too, before the wendigo took him? "Let's get you out of here," Martinez said, helping me to my feet. "It'll be dark soon, and you need medical attention." I looked down at Dakota one last time. I can't leave him." Martinez exchanged a look with Whitaker, who nodded. "We'll bring him out," she promised. "You don't have to worry about that." The walk back to the ranger station passed in a blur. I was aware of the rangers talking among themselves, of being given a blanket and hot tea, of answering basic questions about my identity and what I was doing in the forest alone. But it all seemed distant, unimportant. All I could think about was Dakota and the creature that had killed him, a creature that shouldn't exist outside of legend. At the ranger station, a medic examined the scratches on my face and the bruises from my fall. I was suffering from mild hypothermia and exhaustion, he said, but would recover fully with rest. Physically, at least. Ranger Martinez sat with me while I waited for Melissa to arrive and drive me home. "We found some unusual tracks out there," she said carefully. "Not like any animal I've seen in these woods before." I looked up, meeting her gaze. There was something in her eyes, a knowledge or at least a suspicion that went beyond what she was saying. "The locals have stories," she continued, her voice low, "about something in these woods in winter, something that hunts when food is scarce." "A wendigo," I whispered. Martinez didn't confirm or deny it. She simply said, "The Seneca people who lived in these forests for thousands of years before us had a deep respect for these lands and the spirits that dwell here. They understood there are things in this world that defy our modern explanations." Before I could respond, the door opened and Melissa rushed in, her face pale with worry. Our conversation was cut short as my sister enveloped me in a tight hug, asking a million questions I wasn't ready to answer. As I was leaving, Martinez pressed a small leather pouch into my hand. "Protection," she said quietly, "just in case." The pouch contained dried herbs and what looked like small bones, bound together with red thread. Under different circumstances, I might have dismissed it as superstition. Now, I clutched it tightly, nodding my thanks. That was 3 months ago. Spring has come to Pennsylvania, bringing with it new life and color to the forests I once loved. But I haven't set foot on a hiking trail since that day. I'm not sure I ever will again. The official report listed Dakota's death as the result of an attack by an unidentified predator. The rangers recovered his body and brought it to a vet who specializes in wildlife forensics, but the results were inconclusive. Melissa thinks it was a mountain lion, though there haven't been confirmed sightings in the Allegheny Forest for decades. I've tried to move on. I adopted another dog, a gentle rescue named Luna, who never leaves my side. I return to work at the library. I continue my sessions with Dr. Wallace, though I've never told her the full truth of what happened in those woods. Some things are better left unspoken, but sometimes, on cold nights when the wind howls around my house, I find myself staring out the window at the tree line behind my property. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a tall, gaunt figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching my home with hungry eyes. I keep Ranger Martinez's protective pouch under my pillow. I've researched the Wendigo legend extensively, learning about its insatiable hunger, its association with winter and starvation, its ability to mimic human voices to lure victims into the deep woods. The missing hiker was never found. 2 more have disappeared since then, their cases still open. The authorities blame exposure, wild animals, or accidental falls. They warn about the dangers of winter hiking, about being properly prepared for the harsh conditions of the Pennsylvania mountains. But they never mention what really hunts in those ancient forests when the snow falls and the world goes quiet. They never warn about the Wendigo. And why would they? Who would believe them? I wouldn't have once. But now I know better. Now I know what waits in the wilderness, wearing the faces of those it has consumed, eternally hungry for more. My name is Rachel Rogers, and this is my warning to you. Stay out of the woods in winter. Don't go alone. And if you hear your name called by a voice you don't recognize, run. Run, and don't look back. Because some predators don't just want your flesh, they want your soul. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania, 3 months ago, though the nightmares make it feel like yesterday. I'd been planning a solo hiking trip for months. After my divorce and the subsequent custody battle over our daughter, Lily, I needed to clear my head. The judge had awarded joint custody, but Claire got primary. I only saw Lily every other weekend now. The arrangement gnawed at me daily. I chose the North Country Trail section that runs through the Allegheny National Forest, specifically the stretch near Hart's Content Recreation Area. I'd read about its old-growth forest and pristine wilderness. What the guidebooks didn't mention were the local legends about hikers who wandered off the main trails, never to return whole. The drive from Pittsburgh took about 3 hours. I arrived at the trailhead parking lot around noon on a Friday in early October. The fall colors were at their peak, brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows painting the forest canopy. A few other cars were parked there, but I saw no one else as I shouldered my pack and checked my map one last time. The first few miles were exactly what I needed. Peaceful, quiet, with only the occasional sound of birds or scurrying wildlife. I breathed deeply, feeling the tension of the past year begin to uncoil from my shoulders. The trail occasionally ran alongside Minister Creek, its crystal-clear water bubbling over smooth stones. I stopped to fill my water bottle, using my filter system as a precaution. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing where I decided to make camp. I had covered about 8 miles and felt pleasantly tired. I set up my tent, gathered wood for a small fire, and prepared a simple dinner of dehydrated pasta. As I ate, I watched the sunlight fade through the trees, casting long shadows across my campsite. That's when I heard it. A voice calling from somewhere deep in the forest. "Hello? Is someone there?" It sounded like a woman, her voice thin with fear or exhaustion. I stood up, scanning the darkening woods. "Hello?" I called back. "Are you okay?" Silence answered me. I waited, listening intently. Then it came again, more distant this time. "Please, help me." I hesitated. Night was falling fast, and hiking through unfamiliar woods in the dark was exactly the kind of foolishness that got people killed. But the voice had sounded genuinely distressed. "I'm coming," I called out. "Keep talking so I can find you." I grabbed my headlamp, a small first aid kit, and my water bottle, securing them in my day pack. I made sure my fire was safe to leave unattended for a short time and marked my campsite clearly with a bright orange marker tied to a tree branch. The beam of my headlamp cut through the growing darkness as I moved carefully in the direction of the voice. I called out every few minutes, but there was no further response. Still, I pressed on, convincing myself I was heading in the right direction. After about 20 minutes of cautious hiking, I came upon a narrow deer path leading down into a small hollow. The area looked unusually dark, as if the trees grew thicker here, blocking what little remained of the twilight. My headlamp seemed to dim as I descended the path. "Hello?" I called again. "Is anyone there?" A rustle of leaves to my right made me turn quickly. My light caught movement, something pale disappearing behind a large oak tree. I moved toward it. "Hey, I'm here to help. Are you hurt?" As I rounded the tree, I found a small clearing. In its center stood a woman with her back to me. She wore what looked like a dirty white nightgown, her dark hair hanging in tangled ropes down her back. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I approached cautiously. I heard someone calling for help. She didn't turn or acknowledge me. A chill that had nothing to do with the October air ran down my spine. "Ma'am?" I was about 10 feet away now. Slowly, she began to turn. I noticed her bare feet first, caked with dark mud and scratched bloody. Then I saw her hands, pale and thin, with unnaturally long fingers that ended in blackened nails. When she fully faced me, I stumbled backward. Her face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over prominent cheekbones. But it was her eyes that turned my blood to ice, completely black, like pools of oil, with no whites or irises visible. She smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and sharp for a human mouth. "Thomas," she whispered, though I was certain I hadn't told her my name. "I'm so glad you came." I backed away, nearly tripping over an exposed root. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" Her smile widened impossibly. "We know all the lonely ones who wander into our woods." She took a step toward me. "The lost fathers, the abandoned husbands, the ones with holes in their hearts." My back hit a tree. The woman, no, the thing, was now just a few feet away. "What do you want?" My voice was barely a whisper. "To fill that emptiness, Thomas." She reached out one of those terrible hands. "To make you whole again." I ducked under her arm and ran. I didn't care about direction or trail markers. Blind panic drove me forward, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over logs and rocks. Branches whipped at my face, drawing blood, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard movement. Not the sound of someone running, but a slithering, rushing noise that seemed to come from all directions at once. And underneath it, that voice, calling my name over and over in a sing-song tone that made my skin crawl. "Thomas. Thomas. Don't you want to see Lily again?" The mention of my daughter's name sent a jolt of terror through me so intense I nearly vomited. How did it know about Lily? I ran faster, my lungs burning, legs threatening to give out. My headlamp bounced wildly, creating disorienting flashes of light and shadow. I had no idea if I was heading toward my campsite or deeper into the forest. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I broke through a line of trees and found myself on what appeared to be a trail. Not the main hiking path, but a narrower, less maintained route. I paused, gasping for breath, and listened. Silence. No slithering sounds, no calling of my name. Had I lost it? I leaned against a tree, trying to get my bearings. My watch showed it was just past 9 p.m. I'd been running for nearly 40 minutes. The moon had risen, casting faint silvery light through breaks in the canopy. I studied my surroundings, trying to determine which way might lead back to my campsite. That's when I noticed the small wooden sign nailed to a nearby tree. Faded and weathered, it read, "Hollow Path, Keep Out." A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around, raising my light, but saw nothing but trees and shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I needed to find my way back to my camp and then to my car at first light. I decided to follow the trail in what I hoped was the general direction of my campsite. The path was rough and overgrown in places, suggesting it wasn't frequently used. I moved as quickly as I dared in the dim light, constantly checking over my shoulder. After about 15 minutes, the trail opened onto what appeared to be an old, abandoned campground. Rustic log cabins, their windows dark and empty, stood in a rough semicircle around a central fire pit. The place had clearly been deserted for years. Vegetation crept up the cabin walls and parts of some roofs had collapsed. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, reluctant to venture into such an exposed area. But the trail continued on the other side, and I was certain it would eventually connect with the main hiking path. As I crossed the campground, I couldn't help but peer into the cabins I passed. Most were empty save for broken furniture or animal droppings, but the last cabin, standing slightly apart from the others, had a light flickering inside. I froze. It wasn't the steady beam of a flashlight or lantern, but the wavering glow of candles. Someone, or something, was in there. I should have hurried past. I should have continued on the trail and not looked back, but exhaustion and fear had worn down my judgment. Maybe it was a ranger or another hiker who could help me find my way back. I approached cautiously, stepping onto the small porch. The wooden boards creaked beneath my weight. Through a dirty window, I could see multiple candles arranged in a circle on the floor. In the center of that circle lay what looked like a small pile of clothing. I tapped lightly on the door. "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, the door swung open easily. The smell hit me immediately. a cloying mix of decay, candle wax, and something else, something metallic and familiar. Blood. What I had mistaken for clothing was actually a small backpack. A child's backpack. Pink with unicorn patches sewn on. My heart nearly stopped. It was identical to Lily's. I stepped inside, drawn by horrified fascination. The candles surrounded the backpack in a perfect circle. Next to it lay a small, worn teddy bear that I recognized with sickening certainty. Mr. Grumbles, my daughter's favorite stuffed animal that traveled with her everywhere, including to my apartment on her weekend visits. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, reaching for the bear with trembling hands. "Don't touch that." The voice came from behind me, deep and gravelly. I spun around. An old man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the night. He stepped forward into the candlelight, revealing a weathered face with deep-set eyes and a gray beard. He wore faded overalls and a flannel shirt like a caricature of a backwoods local. "Who are you?" I demanded, fear giving way to anger. "Why do you have my daughter's things?" He raised his eyebrows. "Your daughter's?" "Mister, I don't know what you're talking about. That stuff belongs to Agnes." "Agnes?" "The Hollow Woman," he said, as if that explained everything. "She takes things from the children who wander too close to her path, keeps them, uses them." "This is insane," I said, backing away. "I'm taking these things and leaving." The old man moved with surprising speed, placing himself between me and the door. "You can't take them. They're hers now. And if you take what's hers—" He trailed off, his eyes darting nervously to the windows. "I don't care about your local ghost stories," I said, scooping up both the backpack and the bear. "These belong to my daughter, and I'm leaving with them." As my hand closed around Mr. Grumbles, all the candles in the room extinguished simultaneously. The old man made a strangled sound and pressed himself against the wall. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "Now she knows." A cold wind rushed through the cabin, though the door and windows remained closed. It swirled around us, carrying that same sing-song voice I'd heard in the forest. "Thomas, what have you taken from me?" The old man bolted past me and out the door, disappearing into the night. I stood frozen, clutching Lily's belongings to my chest. How had they gotten here? Lily was safe with Claire in Pittsburgh, wasn't she? A terrible thought struck me. I fumbled for my phone, but as I expected, there was no service. I had to get back to my car, back to civilization. I had to call Claire and make sure Lily was okay. I shoved the backpack and bear into my day pack and ran out of the cabin. The clearing was now bathed in moonlight, making it easier to see the trail continuing on the far side. I sprinted toward it, ignoring the whispers that seemed to emanate from each dark cabin as I passed. The trail beyond the abandoned campground began to look familiar. After another 10 minutes of fast hiking, I recognized a distinctive rock formation I'd passed earlier that day. I was back on the main North Country Trail. My campsite couldn't be far. Sure enough, after following the trail for another 20 minutes, I spotted the orange marker I'd left. My tent still stood, and the fire had burned down to embers. I quickly gathered my essential gear, leaving the tent and other non-essentials behind. I needed to get to my car as quickly as possible. I checked my watch. 10:45 p.m. Hiking out at night was dangerous, but staying seemed worse. I took a moment to study my map by headlamp, plotting the quickest route back to the trailhead parking lot. It would be about 7 miles, doable in 3 hours if I maintained a good pace and didn't get lost. As I stowed the map, a sound from my tent made me freeze. Something was inside, rustling through my abandoned gear. Slowly, I backed away, preparing to run again. The tent zipper began to open from within. "No," I whispered, turning to flee. "Thomas, is that you?" The voice stopped me cold. It was a child's voice, a girl's voice. "Daddy, why did you leave me?" It sounded exactly like Lily. "You're not her," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not my daughter." The tent flap opened fully. In the dim glow of the dying embers, I could see a small figure crawling out. It looked like a little girl, about 7 years old, Lily's age. She wore pink pajamas with cartoon characters on them, Lily's favorite pair. "Daddy, I'm scared," she said, her voice trembling. "The hollow woman tried to take me, but I ran away. I've been hiding." Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that this thing before me wasn't my daughter. And yet, it looked exactly like her, down to the small mole on her left cheek and the way she held her hands when she was frightened. "Lily is in Pittsburgh," I said firmly, "with her mother." The girl's face crumpled. "No, Daddy, Mom's gone. The hollow woman took her. She sent me to find you, but I got lost." Tears streamed down her face. "Please, Daddy, I want to go home." She took a step toward me, arms outstretched. I found myself wanting to believe her, wanting to scoop her up and protect her. The hollow woman had known about Lily. What if she had somehow taken her? What if this really was my daughter? I knelt down, opening my arms. "Lily." She ran to me, and I embraced her. She felt real, warm and solid, smelling of the strawberry shampoo Claire always used to wash her hair. She buried her face against my chest, her small body shaking with sobs. "It's okay," I whispered, stroking her hair. "I've got you. You're safe now." As I held her, I felt her body begin to change. Her back elongated beneath my hands. Her arms, wrapped around my neck, grew longer, the fingers extending unnaturally. Her hair, which I'd been stroking, became coarse and tangled. I tried to push her away, but she clung to me with inhuman strength. When she finally pulled back to look at me, I saw Lily's face beginning to stretch and distort, the eyes darkening until they were those same oil-black pools I'd seen earlier. "Daddy," she said, her voice changing, deepening, becoming that terrible sing-song again. "Don't you want to stay with me forever?" I tore myself away from her grasp with desperate strength, staggering backward. The thing that had pretended to be my daughter now stood fully transformed into the hollow woman, taller than before, her nightgown billowing around her, though there was no wind. "Your daughter misses you, Thomas," she said, her mouth stretching into that too wide smile. "She cries for you at night. I can take you to her." "Liar!" I screamed, backing toward the trail. "My daughter is safe at home." "Are you sure?" She tilted her head at an impossible angle. "Check your phone." Despite knowing better, I pulled out my phone. To my shock, I had a signal. 1 bar, and there were 17 missed calls from Claire. 3 voicemails, dozens of text messages, the most recent from just an hour ago. "Thomas, please if you get this call me Lily is missing." My knees nearly buckled. I looked up at the hollow woman, who was watching me with those terrible black eyes. "What have you done?" I whispered. "I've done nothing," she said, "but I can help you find her. For a price." "What price?" Her smile widened again. "Stay with me. Take her place. A father's sacrifice for his child. What could be more pure?" I knew I shouldn't trust her. This had to be another trick, another way to lure me in. And yet those missed calls, those texts from Claire, they seemed real. "How do I know you'll really help me find her?" I asked, playing for time, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. The hollow woman extended one of her long-fingered hands. In her palm lay a small gold locket, the one I'd given Lily on her 5th birthday, with our family photo inside. "She's waiting for you to save her, Thomas. Deeper in the hollow. But you can't go to her unless you agree to my terms. Your life for hers." I stared at the locket, my mind racing. Could this be real? Was Lily really here in these woods, taken by this creature? Or was this an elaborate illusion designed to trap me? I thought of calling Claire, but what if the signal disappeared? What if this was my only chance to save my daughter? "Show her to me first," I said. "Let me see that she's alive and unharmed. Then I'll consider your offer." The hollow woman regarded me for a long moment, her head still cocked at that unnatural angle. Finally, she nodded. "Follow me," she said, turning toward the darkest part of the forest. "But know this. Once we reach the center of the hollow, you can't leave unless I allow it. The choice must be made there." Against every rational thought, I followed her. We left the trail immediately, descending into a ravine that seemed to grow darker with each step, as if the very air absorbed light. My headlamp dimmed until it was barely visible, then died completely. Still, I could see the hollow woman's pale form gliding ahead of me. We walked for what felt like hours but might have been minutes. Time seemed to distort in this place. The temperature dropped steadily until I could see my breath clouding before me. The forest around us grew more twisted and unnatural. Trees bent at impossible angles, their bark blackened as if by fire, though no burn marks scarred the ground beneath them. Finally, we reached a clearing dominated by an enormous oak tree. Its trunk must have been 15 feet in diameter, gnarled and ancient. At its base, a dark opening led into the hollow interior of the tree. The hollow woman stopped and turned to me. "She's inside. You may look, but remember your promise." I approached the opening cautiously. It was large enough for me to enter without stooping. Inside, the hollow trunk opened into a space much larger than should have been possible. And there, curled up on a bed of leaves in the center, was Lily, my Lily, clutching Mr. Grumbles to her chest, her eyes closed as if sleeping. "Lily," I called, rushing to her side. Her eyes fluttered open. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak. "Is it really you?" I gathered her into my arms, feeling her solid warmth, her realness. This was no illusion. This was my daughter. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm going to get you out of here." "You can't," the hollow woman said from the entrance. "Not unless you take her place. That was our agreement." I looked down at Lily, then back at the creature. "Let me get her safely to the trail. Then I'll come back. I swear it." The hollow woman considered this, those black eyes unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "The child may walk to the edge of the hollow. You will accompany her. Then you will return to me." I helped Lily to her feet. She was weak, but could walk with my support. As we passed the hollow woman, she reached out and stroked Lily's hair with one of her terrible hands. "Goodbye, little one," she whispered. "Your father loves you very much." Lily shrank against me, and I hurried her past the creature. Once outside the tree, I could see a faint path leading upward, presumably toward the main trail. "Listen to me carefully, Lily," I said, kneeling before her. "I need you to be very brave. You're going to follow this path all the way to the top. Don't stop. Don't look back, no matter what you hear. When you reach the main trail, turn right and keep walking until you find help or reach the parking lot. Do you understand?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "But what about you, Daddy? Aren't you coming with me?" I swallowed hard. "I'll be right behind you. I just need to make sure the hollow woman doesn't follow us. Now go, quickly." I watched as she started up the path, moving slowly at first, then faster as she gained distance from the hollow tree. When she was about 50 yards away, I called out to her, "Lily." She turned. "I love you," I said. "No matter what happens, remember that." She waved, then continued up the path until she disappeared among the trees. I turned back to the hollow tree, where the woman waited, a terrible smile stretching across her face. "You've made a noble choice, Thomas," she said. "Few fathers would do the same." I approached her slowly. "Let's get this over with." She reached out her hand to me. As I reluctantly extended mine to meet it, I heard a sound that made both of us freeze. Voices, multiple voices, and the beams of several flashlights cutting through the darkness above us. "Thomas Davis," a man's voice called. "Pennsylvania Forest Rangers, can you hear us?" The hollow woman hissed, drawing back into the tree. "You tricked me," she spat. "You brought them here." "I did nothing of the sort," I said truthfully. "I have no idea who that is." More voices joined the first, closer now. Flashlight beams danced among the trees on the slope above us. "The bargain is broken," the hollow woman snarled. "The child is mine again." "No," I lunged for her, but she slipped into the hollow tree like smoke. I dove in after her, but the interior was empty. No Lily, no hollow woman, just a normal, albeit large, hollow in an old tree. "Lily!" I screamed, spinning around wildly. "Lily!" "Over here," a man's voice called from outside. "I found someone." Moments later, 3 forest rangers burst into the hollow, their powerful flashlights momentarily blinding me. "Mr. Davis," one of them asked, approaching cautiously. "Thomas Davis." I nodded numbly. "My daughter," I managed to say. "She was here. The hollow woman took her again." The rangers exchanged glances. One of them, an older man with a salt and pepper beard, stepped forward. "Mr. Davis, your ex-wife called us when she couldn't reach you. She was concerned about some texts you sent her about your daughter being in danger." "I didn't send any texts," I said, confused. "Claire called me. Lily was missing." The ranger shook his head. "Your daughter is safe at home with her mother in Pittsburgh. We confirmed that before beginning our search for you." "But—" I looked around the empty hollow. I saw her. I held her. She was here. "Sir, you've been reported missing for 3 days," another ranger said gently. "Your campsite was found abandoned and your car has been in the parking lot since Friday. It's now Monday night." 3 days? That couldn't be right. I'd only been in the forest for 1 night. "But the hollow woman," I insisted. "She took my daughter. I saw Lily's backpack, her teddy bear." I reached for my day pack to show them, but it wasn't there. I had no pack, no gear, just the clothes I wore, which were filthy and torn. The older ranger stepped closer, shining his light on me with concern. "Mr. Davis, there's an old legend in these parts about a spirit called Agnes Hollow, who lures hikers off the trail by mimicking their loved ones. It's just a story locals use to keep people from wandering into dangerous areas." "No," I said, backing away. "It was real. I saw her. I saw Lily." "You're suffering from exposure and dehydration," the third ranger said. "Possibly hallucinating. We need to get you medical attention." They led me out of the hollow tree and up the path to the main trail, where a larger search party waited. Someone gave me water and wrapped a thermal blanket around my shoulders. They told me they'd been searching for me since Claire reported me missing Saturday night, after I failed to call her as promised. As they prepared to escort me back to the trailhead, I took one last look down into the dark hollow. For just a moment, I thought I saw a pale figure standing among the twisted trees, watching me with black eyes. Then a ranger's flashlight swept over the area, and there was nothing there. They took me to a local hospital, where doctors treated me for dehydration, exposure, and minor injuries. Claire arrived with Lily in tow, both of them tearful but relieved. Lily threw herself into my arms and I held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her solid warmth. "I was so worried, Daddy," she said. "Mom said you got lost in the woods." "I did," I told her, stroking her hair. "But I'm okay now. Everything's okay." Later, after Lily had fallen asleep in a chair by my hospital bed, Claire told me something strange. On Friday night, around 9 p.m., Lily had woken up screaming from a nightmare. She claimed a woman with black eyes had been in her room trying to take her away. "She was so upset," Claire said. "She insisted the woman told her you were looking for her in the forest and she needed to go find you. It took hours to calm her down." I said nothing, just held Lily's hand as she slept. The doctors attributed my hallucinations to dehydration and the stress of being lost in the wilderness. The rangers suggested I'd become disoriented and wandered in circles, eventually stumbling upon an old abandoned ranger station, the cabins I'd seen. I nodded and agreed with their explanations. What else could I do? To insist on what I'd seen and experienced would only convince them I needed psychiatric help. But I know what happened in those woods. I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that sing-song voice calling my name, promising to reunite me with what I've lost. I won't be hiking alone again. And I've asked Claire for more time with Lily, full weeks instead of just weekends. To my surprise, she agreed. Perhaps she sensed the same thing I did, that something in those woods had nearly taken our daughter, and that it might try again if given the chance. Every night now, I check the locks twice, I make sure Lily's window is secure, and I've placed a small pouch of salt and iron nails, remedies an old nurse at the hospital whispered to me were proof against the hollow folk, under her pillow. Because I know Agnes Hollow is real. I know she's patient, and I know she doesn't forgive those who break their promises. Sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I see those black eyes watching me from the darkness of my room. And sometimes, when Lily comes back from her mother's house, I catch the faint scent of decay beneath her strawberry shampoo. And I wonder, did I really save my daughter that night? Or did something else follow me home from the hollow? My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the Quahana Wild area in northern Pennsylvania just last fall. I've always been the adventurous type. Growing up in Pittsburgh, I spent most weekends hiking with my father in the Allegheny National Forest. When adulthood came with its responsibilities, a marketing job downtown, an apartment in Shadyside, bills to pay, those weekend escapes became increasingly precious. After my father passed away from a sudden heart attack last year, hiking became my way of keeping his memory alive. I'd been planning this solo trip for months. 4 days in the remote Quahana Wild area, one of Pennsylvania's largest wilderness regions with over 50,000 acres of undisturbed forest. My friends thought I was crazy to go alone, especially with October's unpredictable weather. But I needed this. Time away from everything, surrounded only by the rustle of leaves and the whispers of wind through ancient pines. "Just take Bear with you," my roommate Allison had insisted, nodding toward my German Shepherd. "At least then you'll have some protection." Bear had been my father's dog before he died. At 6 years old, he was still strong and alert, with senses far sharper than mine. I hadn't initially planned to bring him, wanting solitude, but Allison's concerns made sense. The wilderness could be unpredictable. "Fine," I agreed, scratching behind Bear's ears. "We could use some bonding time anyway." I packed light but thorough: tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, dehydrated meals, water purification tablets, first aid kit, compass, maps, and my father's old hunting knife. Bear would carry his own food in a doggy backpack. My smartphone was for emergencies only, though I knew reception would be spotty at best. The 5-hour drive from Pittsburgh to Quahana was uneventful. I parked at the Quahana Highway trailhead and shouldered my pack while Bear pranced excitedly nearby, already sensing adventure. The mid-October air felt crisp and clean, carrying the earthy scent of decaying leaves and pine sap. "Ready, boy?" I smiled, double-checking my trail map. We'd follow the Quahana Trail to a spot called Marion Brooks Natural Area, home to the largest stand of white birch in Pennsylvania. From there, we'd loop through Wyckoff Run, eventually camping near an area called the Tea Kettle. 4 days, approximately 40 miles total. The first few hours were perfect. Sunlight filtered through the red-gold canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Bear stayed close, occasionally darting off to investigate interesting scents before returning faithfully to my side. The trail was well marked but clearly not heavily traveled, exactly what I wanted. By late afternoon, we'd covered about 10 miles. My muscles ached pleasantly, and I decided to make camp in a small clearing near a stream. I set up the tent, collected firewood, and prepared a simple dinner of rehydrated beef stew. Bear ate his kibble, then settled nearby, watching the surrounding forest with alert ears. As darkness fell, so did the temperature. I built the fire higher, wrapping myself in a fleece blanket as I listened to the nocturnal symphony beginning around us. Crickets, distant owl hoots, and the gentle gurgle of the stream. The stars emerged in breathtaking clarity, far from city lights. "Dad would have loved this," I whispered to Bear, who tilted his head at me. A lump formed in my throat as I remembered the countless nights my father and I had spent just like this, sharing stories by firelight. I missed him desperately. Around midnight, Bear suddenly stood, hackles raised. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, instantly alert. The fine hairs on my arms rose despite the fire's warmth. Bear stared intently into the darkness beyond our camp, his body rigid. I strained to hear anything unusual, but detected only normal forest sounds. "Probably just a deer," I said, trying to convince myself more than him. Still, I grabbed my father's hunting knife and tucked it into my boot before adding more wood to the fire. Bear eventually settled down, though he remained watchful. I crawled into my tent but left the flap open so I could see both Bear and the fire. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by strange dreams of being watched. Dawn broke gray and misty. My eyes felt gritty from poor sleep, and a light drizzle tapped against the tent. Bear was already awake, sitting alert at the tent entrance. To my dismay, the fire had completely died, not just burned down, but entirely extinguished without even smoking embers. "That's weird," I muttered, crawling out. The ashes were cold and damp, as if they'd been out for hours. I distinctly remembered adding a large log before finally falling asleep. Breakfast was instant coffee and oatmeal prepared on my portable stove. The rain intensified as we ate, forcing us to shelter under a large pine. By 9 a.m., it had lightened to a drizzle again, and we set off toward Marion Brook's natural area. The trail conditions worsened considerably after the rain. Mud sucked at my boots, and slippery rocks made progress slow. The forest seemed different today, darker, closer somehow, despite the thinning foliage. Bear stayed unusually close to my legs, occasionally whining softly. By midday, we should have reached the white birch stand, but according to my map, we were still miles away. I checked my phone for GPS but found no signal. The compass showed we were heading northeast as planned, yet something felt off. "We can't be lost," I told Bear, studying the map again. "We've been following the markers." That's when I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker for at least an hour. A spike of panic hit my chest. I turned slowly, surveying our surroundings. The path we'd been following was barely visible now, more animal track than hiking trail. Dense pines crowded around us, their needled branches seeming to reach inward. The mist hung between the trunks like tattered gray curtains. "We need to backtrack," I decided, swallowing hard. Bear whined again, pressing against my leg. We turned around, but within 20 minutes I had the unsettling feeling we weren't retracing our steps at all. The terrain looked unfamiliar, rockier, with deep ravines cutting across what should have been gentle slopes. By late afternoon, exhaustion and fear were taking their toll. We needed to make camp, lost or not. I found a relatively flat area beneath a rocky overhang that would provide some shelter. My hands trembled slightly as I set up the tent. "It's okay," I told Bear, who hadn't left my side. "We'll figure it out in the morning. Better visibility." I decided against a fire, partly because the wood was all damp, but mostly because I had the irrational fear that it might attract something. Instead, I used my portable stove to heat a package of pasta primavera, though I barely tasted it. Bear refused his food entirely. Night fell with brutal swiftness. The clouds had cleared, but instead of being comforting, the moonlight created unsettling shadows that seemed to move when viewed peripherally. I kept my flashlight close along with my father's knife. "It's just the wilderness," I whispered to myself. "You've done this dozens of times." But I hadn't. Not alone. Not without my father's reassuring presence. I must have eventually dozed off because I jerked awake to Bear's frantic barking. My watch read 2:17 a.m. The barking stopped abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched whine I'd never heard him make before. "Bear," I called, fumbling for my flashlight. What is it?" When I switched on the light, Bear was standing at the tent entrance, staring outside, his entire body trembling. I crawled forward and peered past him. In the clearing before our tent stood a deer, a doe, motionless and facing away from us. Even in the dim light, something about it seemed wrong. It was too still, its proportions slightly off. "It's just a deer," I whispered, my voice catching. As if hearing me, the deer's head rotated. Not its body, just its head, turning nearly 180 degrees to face us. Its eyes reflected my flashlight beam back as solid white discs. No pupil, no iris, just white. My breath froze in my lungs. The deer's mouth opened wider than any deer's mouth should, revealing rows of what looked like human teeth. A sound emerged, a rattling wheeze that might have been trying to form words. Bear lunged forward, barking furiously. I screamed his name, but he was already charging the creature. The deer thing remained perfectly still until Bear was almost upon it. Then it moved with impossible speed, not running but seeming to flicker like a bad video signal, disappearing into the trees. Bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, barking into the darkness. I called him back repeatedly, my voice rising with hysteria, until he finally returned. His fur was on end, eyes wild with fear or aggression. I couldn't tell which. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat awake, knife in hand, jumping at every sound while Bear paced the small tent. When dawn finally came, it brought no relief, just a gray, oppressive light filtering through a sky heavy with returning clouds. The forest felt wrong. The usual morning birdsong was absent, and the air hung unnaturally still, thick with moisture and the cloying smell of decomposing vegetation. As I packed up our camp with shaking hands, I kept seeing movement from the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing. "We're getting out of here," I told Bear, studying my map. If we headed due west according to my compass, we should eventually hit the Quahana Highway, no matter how off course we'd gotten. We set off at a brisk pace. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, deadfall blocking our path, sudden sinkholes appearing underfoot, thorny undergrowth tearing at my clothes. It was as if the forest itself was trying to slow our progress. Around noon, we reached a small clearing dominated by an ancient oak tree. Its massive trunk was split down the middle, creating a dark crevice wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Hanging from its lower branches were hundreds of small objects that clinked together in the light breeze. I approached cautiously. They were teeth, animal teeth, human teeth, threaded onto thin cords of what looked like hair. My stomach lurched. "Let's go," I whispered to Bear, backing away slowly. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around to see an old woman standing at the clearing's edge. She was small and bent, dressed in what looked like layers of tattered clothing. Her white hair hung in matted ropes around a face deeply lined with age, but her eyes were bright and alert, watching me with unnerving intensity. "You're off the trail," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. Bear growled low in his throat. Yes, I stammered. "We got lost yesterday. I'm trying to find my way back to the highway." The old woman tilted her head, studying me. "Not many come to the Hollow Pines. Not on purpose." "The Hollow Pines?" I repeated. "Is that what this area is called? It's not on my map." "Wouldn't be," she said, taking a step closer. Bear's growl intensified. "Maps don't show everything. Don't show what don't want to be found." A chill ran down my spine. "Can you point me toward the highway? Or the main trail?" She pointed a gnarled finger westward, roughly the direction I'd been heading. "That way, but you'd best hurry. Sun sets early in the Hollow Pines and you don't want to be here after dark." Her eyes flicked to Bear. "Not even with your protector." "What was that thing last night?" I asked suddenly. "The deer with the—" I couldn't finish. The old woman's face hardened. "Hollow folk. The forest takes animals sometimes, empties them out, fills them with something else." She reached into a pouch at her waist and withdrew a small object, holding it out to me. "Take this." I hesitantly extended my hand. She dropped a small figurine carved from dark wood into my palm, a crude representation of a dog, similar to Bear. "Keep it close," she said. "Hollow folk don't like the heartwood. Burns them." "Thank you," I said uncertainly, tucking the figurine into my pocket. "Do you live around here? Are there others?" "Just me now," she said, her gaze drifting to the tooth-laden tree. "Used to be the Saxton family. Before that, the Miners. All gone now." Her eyes refocused on me with sudden sharpness. "Go. Follow the moss. It grows thicker on the west side of the trees. Don't stop, don't look back, and whatever you hear calling your name, it's not your father." My blood turned to ice. "How do you—" "Go," she commanded, her voice cracking like a whip. Bear tugged at my sleeve with his teeth, pulling me away. When I looked back, the old woman was gone, though I hadn't heard her move. We walked westward with renewed urgency. The forest grew darker despite being midday, the trees pressing closer together. Mist crept along the ground, swirling around our feet. Bear no longer investigated anything but stayed right at my side, occasionally whining softly. For hours, we pushed forward, following the moss growth as the old woman had instructed. My water ran low, but I was too afraid to stop at any of the small streams we crossed. The forest had fallen completely silent except for our footsteps and the occasional distant sound, like something heavy being dragged over the ground. As the dim light began to fade further, I checked my watch, 3:47 p.m. The sun shouldn't set for hours yet, but darkness was definitely closing in. I switched on my flashlight, its beam seeming feeble against the gathering shadows. "We have to move faster," I told Bear, breaking into a jog where the terrain allowed. He kept pace easily, though I could sense his growing unease. The first call came when the forest was already cloaked in premature night. "Jessica." I froze. The voice was distant but unmistakable. My father's voice coming from somewhere behind us. Bear growled, tugging at my sleeve again. "Jessica, honey, I'm lost. Help me find you." Tears sprang to my eyes. It sounded exactly like him. The slight gravel in his tone, the way he softened the S sounds. "It's not real," I whispered, remembering the old woman's warning. "It's not him. Jessica, please, I'm hurt. I need you." I began running blindly, crashing through underbrush, Bear racing alongside me. Branches whipped my face, and twice I nearly fell into sudden drops that appeared in our path. The voice followed, sometimes sounding like it was right beside my ear, other times calling distantly, always with increasing distress. "Jessica, they're after me. Please, I can't hold them off much longer." I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voice seemed to bypass my hearing entirely, appearing directly in my mind. "Jessica, they're taking me apart." The scream that followed wasn't human anymore. A twisting, multi-toned shriek that rose and fell like a broken siren. Bear howled in response, the sound equally agonized. We stumbled into a clearing and I fell to my knees, gasping. Bear circled me protectively, hackles raised, growling at shapes that moved just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. They were everywhere, animals standing unnaturally still at the edge of the darkness. A raccoon with backward feet, a coyote with too many eyes, a hawk perched motionless on a low branch, its head twisted upside down, watching us with glazed eyes, and behind them, taller shadows, vaguely human-shaped but wrong, their proportions distorted, movements jerky and uncoordinated. The hollow folk, I realized. Animals and people emptied out and filled with something else. I felt in my pocket for the wooden figurine the old woman had given me. It seemed to pulse warmly against my fingers. "Heartwood burns them," I whispered, an idea forming. With shaking hands, I pulled out my emergency fire-starting kit. The ground was damp, but I had a small bottle of hand sanitizer, mostly alcohol. I quickly gathered what dry tinder I could find and piled it around the wooden dog figurine. The shapes moved closer. Bear's growls became frantic. The air grew heavy with a putrid smell like meat left too long in summer heat. I struck match after match, finally getting one to catch on the alcohol-soaked material. The flame was small at first, but as it touched the wooden figurine, it flared suddenly with a bright blue light that illuminated the entire clearing. The effect was immediate. The hollow creatures retreated from the light with silent screams, their bodies contorting unnaturally. I fed the fire with whatever I could reach, keeping one hand on Bear's collar to prevent him from charging the retreating figures. In the brightening firelight, I saw a gap in the trees ahead, not a natural opening but a straight cut, too regular to be anything but man-made. A road or trail. "We need to run for it," I told Bear, gathering my courage. The fire wouldn't last long. As if hearing my thoughts, the blue flames began to sputter. The hollow creatures edged forward again, their movements more agitated. "Now!" I shouted, springing to my feet and sprinting toward the gap in the trees. Bear raced ahead, leading the way. Behind us, something let out that terrible multi-voiced scream again. The sound of pursuit crashed through the underbrush. Not running, but a bizarre, arrhythmic movement like multiple limbs dragging a heavy body. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. The gap seemed to get no closer despite our desperate pace. Then Bear disappeared through it, barking urgently for me to follow. With a final surge of strength, I broke through the tree line and nearly fell over a guardrail. Beyond it stretched a 2-lane paved road, the Quahana Highway. I vaulted the rail and collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping. Bear pressed against me, trembling but alert, watching the forest edge. For a moment, I thought I saw them there. The old woman standing before a crowd of twisted shadows, her arms raised as if holding them back. Then my vision blurred with exhaustion and tears, and when I looked again, there was nothing but darkness between the trees. A pair of headlights appeared around the bend and I staggered to my feet, waving frantically. The pickup truck slowed, and an elderly man rolled down his window, eyeing me with concern. "You okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed hysterically. "I got lost hiking," I managed. "Can you give me a ride to the nearest town?" He nodded, gesturing to the truck bed. "Dog'll have to ride in back." I hesitated, unwilling to let Bear out of my sight, but the alternative was staying here in the growing darkness. "Okay, thank you." As we climbed in, the man glanced nervously at the forest. "You're lucky I came along. Not many folks drive this stretch after sunset." He put the truck in gear. "Not since the hollow pines started spreading." I stared at him. "You know about the hollow pines?" He nodded grimly. "Everyone local does. Used to be just a small patch deep in the Kahana. Old mining accident in '62. They say it opened something up that should have stayed buried. Been growing ever since, swallowing up more of the forest each year." He looked at me sideways. "You actually came out of there alive? With your dog?" "There was an old woman," I said quietly. "She helped us." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Old Martha Blackwood. Been dead 30 years, but she still watches the boundaries." He made a quick gesture that might have been a cross. "Did she give you anything?" I reached into my pocket, but the wooden figurine was gone. Consumed in the blue fire, I realized. "She did," I said, "but it's gone now." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "That's how it works. A life for a life. Your dog for her token." We drove in silence after that. I stared out the window as we put miles between us and the forest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped, that some part of the hollow pines had come with us, nestled somewhere deep inside. 2 weeks later, safely back in Pittsburgh, I developed the few photos I'd managed to take during the first day of hiking. Most were ordinary forest scenes, but in one, a simple shot of Bear standing on a rock overlooking a valley, there was something in the background. A figure watching from between distant trees, too tall and thin to be human, its head tilted at an impossible angle. And sometimes now, in the darkest hours of night, Bear still growls at empty corners of my apartment, his eyes tracking movement I cannot see. And I could swear, when I'm almost asleep, I hear my father's voice calling my name. Not in pain anymore, but in warning. Don't go back, Jessica. Whatever you do, don't ever go back. But the strangest thing? I've checked every official map of the Quijana Wild area. I've researched its history extensively. There's never been a mining operation there. There's no place called the Hollow Pines. And yet, when I look at my compass now, the needle doesn't point north. It points back. My name is Timothy Hill, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Loyalsock State Forest, Pennsylvania, during what was supposed to be a week-long solo hiking trip through the Old Loggers Path. I've always been drawn to solitude, finding more peace in the whispers of pine trees than in crowded office break rooms. After 7 years working IT for a soulless corporation in Philadelphia, I'd finally saved enough vacation days for a proper escape. I remember the day I set out, October 15th, with autumn painting the forest in crimson and gold. The weather report promised cool, clear days, perfect for hiking. My backpack was perhaps too heavy, loaded with supplies for a week, but I'd done my research. The trail was rated moderate, a 27-mile loop through some of Pennsylvania's most remote wilderness. Remote was exactly what I needed. The first day went smoothly. I covered almost 8 miles before setting up camp near Rock Run, a stream known for its crystal-clear waters. As I pitched my tent under a canopy of maple trees, the sunset bled through the branches, casting long shadows across my campsite. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how perfectly still. That night, I slept soundly to the gentle babble of the stream, waking only once to what sounded like someone walking around my tent. When I unzipped the flap and peered out, the forest was empty, bathed in moonlight. Just my imagination, I told myself before crawling back into my sleeping bag. The second day, I noticed the silence. Hiking through the northern section of the trail, I realized I hadn't heard a single bird call or squirrel rustling through the underbrush. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. I tried to shake the feeling, focusing instead on the spectacular views from a rocky outcrop called Sharp Top Vista. From there, I could see miles of undulating hills, their vibrant colors smudged by a thin layer of mist that clung to the valleys. That night, I camped near an abandoned logging road. As I set up my tent, I noticed strange markings carved into a nearby birch tree. Not trail markers, but crude symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, the edges of the carvings darkened with age. I snapped a photo, thinking I'd look them up when I got back to civilization. I was heating water for my freeze-dried dinner when I first heard it. A low, mournful wailing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound raised the hair on my arms. It wasn't an animal I recognized, too melodic for a coyote, too structured for the wind. It lasted maybe 30 seconds before fading away, leaving behind a silence that felt even heavier than before. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every rustle outside my tent had me reaching for my flashlight. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like someone, or something, circling my campsite, branches snapping beneath careful footsteps. I called out, my voice embarrassingly thin in the darkness. No response. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, into uneasy dreams of being chased through endless trees. The third day began with a dense fog that didn't burn off until nearly noon. The trail became more difficult, with unexpected detours where fallen trees blocked the path. Twice I had to double back after finding myself at dead ends that weren't on my map. I started to wonder if I'd somehow gotten onto an unmarked hunter's trail. My GPS kept glitching, showing me in slightly different locations each time I checked. By mid-afternoon, I'd only covered 4 miles and was nowhere near the shelter marked on my map where I'd planned to spend the night. The forest had changed somehow. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sunlight. The ground became soft and spongy underfoot, dotted with clusters of pale mushrooms I didn't recognize. I stopped at a small clearing to consult my map again when I noticed the smell. A putrid, rotting odor that seemed to be coming from a depression in the ground about 20 feet away. Against my better judgment, I approached it. The hole was roughly 3 feet across and appeared to have been recently dug. The smell intensified as I got closer. I was about to peer inside when I heard that wailing again, much closer this time. I backed away from the hole, scanning the trees around me. That's when I saw her. A woman standing between two distant pines, partially obscured by mist. She wore what looked like a long, white dress or nightgown, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She wasn't moving, just watching me. I raised my hand in greeting, thinking she might be another hiker, though her attire seemed completely inappropriate for the wilderness. "Hello," I called out. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. When I took a step toward her, she took a step back, maintaining the distance between us. "Do you need help?" I tried again. This time she raised one pale arm and pointed to her right, deeper into the forest, away from the trail. Then she turned and walked in that direction, her movements unnaturally fluid, as if she were gliding rather than stepping on the uneven forest floor. I hesitated. Following a strange woman off trail into unfamiliar woods went against every survival instinct I had. But what if she was lost or injured? What if she needed help? After a moment's deliberation, I adjusted my backpack and followed her, marking my path by breaking small branches as I went, creating a trail I could follow back. She moved quickly, always staying just far enough ahead that I couldn't make out her features clearly. The forest grew denser, the ground steeper as we moved downhill toward what sounded like running water. After about 15 minutes of this pursuit, I emerged at the edge of a small, stagnant pond that hadn't been on any of my maps. The woman was nowhere to be seen. The pond's surface was completely still, reflecting the gray sky like a mirror. At its center sat a small island, no more than 20 feet across, with a single dead tree rising from it like a twisted hand reaching for the sky. Tied to the tree's branches were dozens of small bundles of sticks, feathers, and what looked disturbingly like animal bones, all bound with fraying red thread. As I stared at this bizarre scene, the temperature seemed to drop. My breath began to fog in front of my face, though it was only mid-October. From somewhere beyond the pond came that same wailing sound, but this time, it was answered by another similar cry from the opposite direction. Then another joined in, and another, until the sounds surrounded me completely. Panic gripped me. I turned to retrace my steps, but the markers I'd left, the broken branches, were gone. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, deepening shadows, and the growing chorus of that terrible wailing. I chose a direction that I thought would lead back to the trail and started running, my heavy backpack throwing me off balance on the uneven ground. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I broke through the trees into another clearing and found myself right back at the pond. The island seemed closer now, the bundles swaying gently though there was no breeze. The wailing had stopped, but in its place was a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to be coming from beneath the pond's surface. That's when I noticed the ripples. Something was moving under the water, heading toward the shore where I stood. I backed away, slipping on the muddy bank and falling hard. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw a pale hand break the surface of the pond, fingers grasping at the air before sinking back down. I ran again, blind with terror, no longer trying to find the trail, but simply trying to get away from that place. Branches whipped at my face, roots caught at my feet, but I didn't stop. The daylight was fading fast, much faster than it should have. It was as if night was rushing in to claim the forest. I don't know how I found my way back to a marked trail, but suddenly, there it was. A blue blaze on a tree trunk, glowing faintly in the beam of my flashlight. I nearly collapsed with relief. The trail wasn't the old logger's path I'd been following, but at that point, I didn't care. Any marked path was better than being lost in those woods after dark. I followed the blue blazes as the last of the daylight vanished, using my flashlight to guide my way. The trail led downhill, eventually bringing me to a narrow dirt road, unmarked on my map but clearly used regularly by vehicles. I decided to follow it, hoping it would lead to a ranger station or at least to a main road where I might flag down a passing car. After about a mile, the road widened, and I came upon a small cluster of buildings, 3 or 4 cabins arranged around a central clearing. A faint light glowed in the window of the largest structure. I approached cautiously, desperately hoping for help, but wary after my strange encounter by the pond. I knocked on the door, my knuckles rapping too loudly in the quiet night. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside, the scrape of a chair, slow footsteps approaching the door. It opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a weathered face illuminated by the yellow glow of lamplight. "Who's there?" The voice was male, elderly, rough with suspicion. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a hiker. I think I'm lost. My name is Timothy Hill." The door opened wider, revealing a man in his 70s, white-haired and stooped, dressed in worn flannel and jeans. He studied me for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You been up by Whispering Pond?" he asked abruptly. My blood ran cold. I think so. A small pond with an island in the middle?" He cursed under his breath, then stepped back, opening the door wider. "You'd better come in. It ain't safe out there after dark. Not in these woods. Not this time of year." His name was Earl Caldwell, and he'd lived in these woods his entire life. The cabin, more of a small house really, was sparsely furnished but clean and warm. A wood stove crackled in the corner, casting dancing shadows on the walls covered with faded photographs and mounted animal heads. "Sit," Earl commanded, gesturing to a chair at a small kitchen table. "You look like hell." I sank into the chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was, how my clothes were caked with mud, my face scratched from branches. "You seen her, didn't you?" he asked as he filled a kettle and placed it on the stove. "The woman in white." I stared at him, unable to form words for a moment. "How did you know?" Earl sighed heavily, pulling out the chair across from me and lowering himself into it with a grunt. "She shows up every October, has done for as long as anyone can remember. Locals call her the Whispering Widow. Legend says she was married to a logger back in the 1890s. When he didn't come home one night, she went looking for him, wandering through these woods, calling his name." He paused as the kettle began to whistle, rising to prepare 2 mugs of instant coffee. The familiar smell was oddly comforting in this strange place. "Story goes," he continued, setting a steaming mug in front of me, "she found him by that pond, the one you stumbled on. He wasn't alone. The camp cook was with him. They'd been together. When she confronted them, they panicked, drowned her in that pond, tied rocks to her body so it would sink. But every year, in the weeks leading up to the anniversary of her death, she comes back, lures people to the pond." "Why?" I asked, wrapping my cold hands around the mug. Earl's eyes met mine, serious and dark. "To join her. She's lonely down there." I laughed nervously. "You can't expect me to believe that." "Believe what you want," he shrugged. "But 5 hikers have gone missing in these woods in the last decade. All in October, all last seen on trails near that pond. They never found a single body." I slept fitfully on Earl's couch that night, waking often to the sounds of the forest outside, the creak of branches, the distant calls of what Earl insisted were just coyotes. In the morning, he offered to drive me to the nearest ranger station where I could report my experience and arrange for transportation back to my car, which was parked at the trailhead some 15 miles away. As we stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. Wet footprints on Earl's porch steps, too small to be his or mine, leading up to the door and then disappearing. The water glistened in the morning light, not yet dried. Earl saw them too and hurried me to his truck without comment. The drive to the ranger station took nearly an hour on winding forest roads. Earl was mostly silent, but as we approached our destination, he finally spoke. "There's something I didn't tell you last night," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "About the Whispering Widow." I turned to look at him, a chill creeping down my spine despite the truck's heater blasting warm air. "The legend says once she shows herself to you, she doesn't give up. She'll follow you all the way home if necessary. She's patient. She might wait years, but eventually she'll call you back to her pond." "That's just a story," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Earl pulled up to the ranger station, a small wooden building with a green metal roof. He put the truck in park but didn't turn off the engine. "Maybe so," he conceded. "But if I were you, I'd move far away from Pennsylvania, and I'd never go hiking alone again." I thanked him for his help, trying to dismiss his warnings as the superstitious fears of an isolated old man. The park ranger was sympathetic about my getting lost but seemed unconcerned about my story of the strange woman in the pond. Such reports were common in these parts, she explained, especially in the fall when mist and unusual light conditions could play tricks on the mind. She helped me arrange for a ride back to my car, and by late afternoon, I was driving back to Philadelphia, trying to convince myself that the entire experience had been the result of exhaustion and isolation. That was 3 weeks ago. Last night, I woke to the sound of water dripping in my bathroom. When I went to check, the faucet was off, but the floor was covered with small, wet footprints that led to my bedroom door. They vanished halfway across my living room carpet. The air in my apartment was heavy with the smell of stagnant water and rotting vegetation. And this morning, when I checked my phone, all my photos from the hiking trip were gone, except for one. A picture I don't remember taking, showing the surface of a pond at sunset, with what looks like a woman's face just beneath the water, her dark hair floating around her pale features, her eyes wide open and looking directly at the camera. "My name is Timothy Hill, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Loyalsock State Forest, Pennsylvania, and I don't think it's over yet." I hear water dripping again. It's coming from inside my closet. Someone is whispering my name. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Loyalsock State Forest in Pennsylvania last October. My wife had left me 6 months earlier, and I was still trying to find myself again. My therapist suggested I reconnect with nature, said it might help clear my head. I used to be an avid hiker before marriage and career took over my life. So I packed my gear, took 2 weeks off work, and headed to the old Loggers Path Trail. I thought the solitude would be good for me. I was wrong. I reached the trailhead near Maston Ghost Town around noon. The fall colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds against a crisp blue sky. I shouldered my overstuffed backpack and checked my trail map one last time. The old Loggers Path is a 27-mile loop, and I plan to take it slow, maybe 5 days for the entire trek. I wanted to savor the wilderness, to find peace again. "Don't go past Rock Run." The old man at the general store in Ralston had warned me that morning when I stopped for last-minute supplies. His face was weathered like old leather, his eyes milky with cataracts. Something ain't right in those woods, especially around Sullivan Mountain. I'd laughed it off. Local superstition, I thought. Pennsylvania woods weren't exactly the Himalayas. What could possibly be dangerous here besides the occasional black bear? The first day's hike was uneventful and exactly what I needed. The trail was well marked, winding through stands of hemlock and maple. The afternoon sun dappled through the canopy, and the only sounds were my boots crunching fallen leaves and the occasional bird call. By evening, I'd made it to Sharptop Vista and set up camp with a spectacular view of the valley below. I built a small fire, ate my freeze-dried meal, and watched the stars emerge. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. I woke before dawn, startled by something I couldn't identify. The fire had died to embers, and the forest was silent. Too silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. just a heavy, waiting stillness. I sat up in my sleeping bag, straining to hear anything. Then came the whisper. "James." It was so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again, slightly louder. "James." A woman's voice coming from the trees beyond my campsite. I fumbled for my flashlight, heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, sweeping the beam of light across the dark wall of trees. "Is someone there?" Nothing. I told myself it was just the wind, or my mind playing tricks. I was still half asleep after all, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. I added wood to the fire, built it up until the flames pushed back the darkness, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, the forest seemed normal again. Birds sang, squirrels chattered, and I felt foolish for my midnight fears. I packed up camp and continued along the trail following Rock Run Creek. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over moss-covered rocks. The beauty of it all helped me forget the voice from the night before, until I found the first carving. It was on an ancient hemlock. The bark split open to reveal what looked like symbols etched deep into the wood. They weren't trail markers. I'd been following the old loggers' path blazes all morning. These were different, older. The cuts were weathered but still visible. Concentric circles with lines radiating outward, like a child's drawing of the sun, but with small, incomprehensible characters etched between the rays. I took a photo with my phone, intending to ask the rangers about it when I got back. Probably just some hiker's graffiti, but it seemed oddly elaborate. I continued on, but now I noticed more carvings on other trees, all with the same unsettling pattern. They became more frequent as I hiked deeper into the forest, as if marking a boundary I was crossing. By mid-afternoon, I reached the Pleasant Stream crossing. According to my map, Sullivan Mountain loomed somewhere ahead, though I couldn't see it through the thick forest. I found a flat, clear area near the stream to make camp for my second night. As I set up my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees. Nothing, just forest. But the sensation persisted, prickling the back of my neck. I gathered wood for a fire, staying close to camp. The sun was already dipping behind the mountains and the temperature was dropping quickly. That's when I heard the humming. It came from upstream, a woman's voice again, singing a melody I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. I followed the sound, picking my way along the rocky stream bed. The humming grew louder, but no matter how far I walked, I couldn't seem to find its source. The light was fading fast, and I knew I should turn back to camp. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted something white among the trees on the far bank. A figure, definitely human, moving slowly between the hemlocks. I called out, but they didn't respond. I crossed the stream, my boots filling with icy water in my haste, and pushed through the underbrush toward where I'd seen the figure. I found only an old stone cairn, about chest high, covered in lichen. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there recently, but placed carefully on top of the cairn was a single white flower, a trillium, though they shouldn't have been blooming in October. I backed away, suddenly aware of how dark it had gotten. I couldn't see the stream anymore, and the trees seemed to have closed in around me. I turned in what I thought was the direction of my camp and started walking quickly. 10 minutes later, I should have reached the stream. I hadn't. The forest looked unfamiliar, though I was certain I hadn't gone far from the water. I stopped, fighting down the surge of panic rising in my throat. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but there was no signal, not even enough to place myself on the downloaded map. Stay calm, I told myself. I took a deep breath and pulled out my compass. Camp was northeast of where I'd crossed the stream. I oriented myself and started walking with more purpose. That's when I smelled the smoke. Relief washed over me. I must be close to my own campfire. I followed the scent, moving faster now, pushing through a dense thicket of mountain laurel. I burst into a small clearing and stopped dead. A campfire burned in a stone ring, but it wasn't mine. My campsite had been in an open area near the stream. This was a dense clearing surrounded by ancient hemlocks, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Next to the fire was a small, dome-shaped tent I didn't recognize. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the vast silence of the forest. No answer. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkness. It looked recently tended, but there was no one around. I approached cautiously and noticed a logbook lying open beside the fire. I shouldn't have looked. I should have turned around and kept searching for my own camp, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the weathered notebook and angled it toward the firelight. The first entries were normal enough: dates, trail conditions, brief thoughts from hikers who had passed through. But as I flipped through the pages, the entries became strange. The handwriting changed, becoming more erratic. The language shifted from English to something else. Words I couldn't read but that seemed vaguely familiar, like something I'd seen earlier that day, like the symbols carved into the trees. The final entry was dated today. The handwriting was neat and precise, nothing like the frantic scrawls on the previous pages. It read simply, "He's here. James Anderson has finally arrived." My blood turned to ice. I dropped the logbook and backed away from the fire. How could anyone know my name? I told no one my exact hiking plans except for a casual mention to the old man at the general store. I'd registered at the trailhead, but only with my first initial and last name. "Who's there?" I shouted, turning in a circle, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "What do you want?" The flames of the campfire suddenly twisted, stretching impossibly high into the air, then died completely. I was plunged into total darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When I finally got it switched on, the beam revealed the clearing was empty. No tent, no fire ring, no signs that anyone had camped there at all. Just an unbroken forest floor covered in years of fallen leaves. I ran. I didn't care which direction anymore. I just needed to get away from that place. Branches whipped at my face. Roots tried to trip me, but I kept going, my lungs burning, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly ahead of me. I don't know how long I ran before I burst out onto the main trail again. I doubled over, hands on my knees, gasping for breath. When I finally looked up, I realized I recognized my surroundings. Somehow, impossibly, I was back at my own campsite. My tent stood untouched. My backpack leaned against a tree where I'd left it. My own fire pit sat cold and unused. I'd been gone for hours, yet it looked like I'd never left. I checked my watch, 8:47 p.m. I had left camp around 5:30 to investigate the humming. That seemed right, but when I checked my phone, the display read 11:23 p.m. Nearly 3 hours had vanished. Too rattled to sleep, I rebuilt my fire and sat with my back against a tree, jumping at every sound from the forest. Around midnight, it started to rain, a gentle patter on the leaves that gradually built to a downpour. I retreated to my tent, zipping the flaps securely. The rain drummed on the nylon, almost drowning out the whispers that seemed to surround me. Almost, but not quite. "James. Why did you come here? James." The voice was right outside my tent now, no longer distant. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, but with something wrong about it, like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. "You shouldn't have come to Sullivan Mountain, James." I clutched my hunting knife, the only weapon I had. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. A shadow moved across the side of my tent, the silhouette of a woman, backlit by what seemed to be moonlight, though the rain was still pouring down. "You know who I am, James. You've always known." And the terrible thing was, in that moment, I did know. The shadow on my tent, the profile of her face. It was Elizabeth, my wife, the wife who had left me 6 months ago after 12 years of marriage. "That's impossible," I whispered. "You're in Arizona." That's where she'd gone after the separation, to stay with her sister. The shadow moved closer to the tent, pressing against the thin fabric. I could see the outline of a hand touching the nylon, pushing slightly inward. "Am I James? Are you sure?" The zipper of my tent began to move upward, slowly, though no hand touched it from the outside. I scrambled backward, knife held out in front of me. The flap opened just enough for rain to spatter inside, and then a hand reached through the gap. A woman's hand, but wrong. The fingers too long, the joints bent at unnatural angles. The skin was pale and wrinkled, like it had been underwater for days. I slashed at it with my knife. The blade passed through the hand as if through smoke, meeting no resistance. The hand withdrew, and the tent flap fell closed. Silence then, except for the rain. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake until dawn, knife in hand, watching the tent entrance. When the first gray light filtered through the trees, the rain stopped. I packed up camp with shaking hands and headed back the way I'd come. Forget the loop. I was getting out of these woods. The trail seemed different in the morning light. Wider in some places, narrower in others. The blazes marking the path were faded, some barely visible. I checked my map repeatedly, increasingly certain I'd somehow strayed from the old logger's path. By noon, I knew I was lost. The trail had dwindled to a barely there track, then disappeared entirely. I was somewhere on the slopes of what must be Sullivan Mountain, though I couldn't be sure. My phone still showed no signal, and even the compass was acting strangely, the needle spinning erratically before settling on a direction, only to spin again moments later. I chose to head downhill, following a small stream that had to eventually join Rock Run or Pleasant Stream. As I picked my way down the steep slope, I noticed more carvings on the trees, the same circular patterns I'd seen the day before, but larger and more elaborate. Some looked freshly cut, the pale wood exposed beneath the bark still oozing sap. The stream led me to a small clearing dominated by a massive hemlock, easily the oldest tree I'd seen in the forest. Its trunk was wider than my outstretched arms could span, and its bark was almost completely covered in carvings, layer upon layer of the circular symbols, overlapping each other like some kind of demented palimpsest. At the base of the tree was another cairn, larger than the one I'd found the previous evening, and sitting atop it was a wooden doll. The craftsmanship was remarkable. It was about a foot tall, carved from dark wood and jointed at the shoulders, hips, and knees. Its face was delicately rendered, a woman's face with high cheekbones and full lips curved in a slight smile, but where the eyes should have been were two empty sockets, drilled deep into the wood. I shouldn't have touched it. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, but I reached out and picked up the doll, turning it over in my hands. It was surprisingly heavy and warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in sunlight rather than the deep shade of the hemlock. On the back of the doll's head, carved in tiny, precise letters, was a name: Elizabeth. I dropped the doll like it had burned me. It clattered against the stones of the cairn, one arm breaking off with the impact. As soon as the limb separated from the body, a high, keening wail rose from somewhere in the forest, a sound of such anguish and rage that I clapped my hands over my ears. The sound cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then came a crack like a gunshot from directly behind me. I spun around to find a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought it was Elizabeth. The same height, the same posture, her dark hair falling across her shoulders just the way my wife's did. But as she stepped forward, I saw it wasn't Elizabeth at all. Her face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were sunken, dark hollows in her pale face. She wore a simple white dress, old-fashioned and threadbare, stained with what looked like mud and something darker. Her bare feet made no sound on the forest floor. "You broke her," the woman said, her voice the same one I'd heard whispering my name. Up close, I could see she was older than I'd first thought, maybe in her 50s, with strands of gray in her dark hair. "I'm sorry," I stammered, backing away. "I didn't mean to." The woman's head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if her neck had been broken and improperly set. "You're always sorry, James. Sorry doesn't fix what's broken. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know you." She smiled then, her lips pulling back to reveal teeth that were too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "I'm Agnes. Agnes Blackwell. This was my land before they took it from me, before they took everything from me." I kept backing away, trying to put distance between us without taking my eyes off her. My heel caught on a root, and I nearly fell. "They blamed me for the children," Agnes continued, moving forward with a strange, gliding motion that didn't match the movement of her legs. "Said I lured them into the woods, but it wasn't me. It was the mountain. Sullivan Mountain has always been hungry." "I'm just trying to get back to the trailhead," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't want any trouble." Agnes laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone. "It's too late for that, James. You came to my mountain, you broke my doll, and now you have to replace her." She lunged at me with impossible speed. I turned to run, but my foot caught in a tangle of roots and I went down hard, my chin striking a rock. Pain exploded through my jaw, and I tasted blood. I rolled onto my back just as Agnes reached me. She straddled my chest, pinning my arms with her knees. Up close, her eyes weren't just dark. They were empty sockets, like those of the wooden doll. The flesh around them was scarred and puckered, as if the eyes had been gouged out. "Elizabeth left you," Agnes whispered, her face inches from mine. Her breath smelled of rotting leaves and stagnant water. "She left because she saw what you really are, what you're capable of." "That's not true," I gasped, struggling to breathe under her weight. She felt impossibly heavy for her slight frame. Agnes reached into a pocket of her dress and pulled out a curved knife, its blade dark with age and rust. "I need your eyes, James. The mountain needs your eyes." I bucked and thrashed, trying to throw her off. Her grip was like iron, her body suddenly much heavier than seemed possible. The knife descended toward my face in agonizing slow motion. "Please," I begged. "I'll do anything." Agnes paused, the knife tip hovering just above my left eye. "Anything?" "Yes, just please don't hurt me." She sat back slightly, considering. "The mountain might accept a different offering, if you're willing." "What? What offering?" "Bring me someone else, someone to take your place." The knife withdrew a few inches. "Someone who deserves punishment." Elizabeth's face flashed in my mind, the way she'd looked at me the night she left with fear in her eyes. Fear of me, of what I'd done when I drank, the bruises I'd left on her arms. I pushed the thought away. "I can't do that. I won't hurt anyone." Agnes's lipless mouth stretched into that terrible smile again. "But you already have, James. That's why you're here. That's why the mountain called you." She leaned down, putting her mouth against my ear. "I know what you did to Elizabeth. I know about the night she tried to leave the first time, how you pushed her down the stairs, how you told the doctors she fell. I know everything, James." Ice spread through my veins. No one knew about that night. Elizabeth had kept my secret, even as she recovered in the hospital, even when she finally left me months later. "The mountain knows," Agnes whispered, "and the mountain punishes men like you." The knife flashed down. I screamed and twisted, managing to free one arm. I caught her wrist, holding the blade inches from my eye. We struggled, her strength far greater than her wasted frame suggested. The point of the knife trembled between us. With my free hand, I groped for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a rock, and I smashed it against the side of Agnes's head. She toppled sideways, the knife clattering to the ground. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly into the forest, not caring which direction, just needing to get away. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I had no idea where I was. The forest looked the same in every direction. Endless hemlocks and maples, their trunks carved with those terrible symbols. I was completely lost. Night was falling. I had left my backpack at the hemlock clearing, along with my tent, food, and water bottle. All I had was the hunting knife on my belt and the clothes I wore. I knew I couldn't survive long without supplies, especially if the temperature dropped as much as it had the previous night. I had to find my way back to the trail, or at least to water. I forced myself to think clearly. Downhill would lead to water. Water would eventually lead to civilization. I oriented myself on the slope and began making my way carefully downward as the last light faded from the sky. The forest at night was alive with sounds: the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, the hoot of an owl, the sigh of wind through the trees. Normal sounds that somehow made me more afraid, perhaps because they seemed to mask other, less natural noises that I could almost but not quite hear. I kept moving, using my knife to mark trees so I wouldn't travel in circles. After what felt like hours, I heard the welcome sound of running water. I followed the sound to a small stream cutting through a ravine. The water gleamed silver in the moonlight that filtered through the trees. I knelt to drink, scooping the cold water into my mouth with my hands. As I straightened, I caught movement reflected in the water, a pale shape moving between the trees on the opposite bank. I whirled around, knife in hand, but saw nothing, just shadows and moonlight. "I know you're there," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Show yourself." Silence. Then a rustle of leaves, and a figure stepped into a patch of moonlight. It was a man, not Agnes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a flannel shirt. His beard was shot through with gray, and his eyes were kind. Completely normal, completely human. Relief washed over me. "Thank God," I said. "I thought I was alone out here." The man smiled. Nobody's ever really alone in these woods. Something in his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tightened my grip on the knife. "I'm lost," I said cautiously. "I'm trying to get back to the old loggers' trailhead." The man nodded. "I figured. You look a bit roughed up." He gestured to his own chin, and I remembered the fall I'd taken. The blood. "Name's Thomas Blackwell. I've got a cabin not far from here. You're welcome to rest up, get your bearings." Blackwell, the same surname as Agnes. Coincidence? "That's kind of you," I said, not moving, "but I really need to get back to my car." Thomas shrugged. "Suit yourself, but it's a good 10 miles back to the trailhead from here, through some rough country. You won't make it tonight." He turned as if to leave. "Offer stands if you change your mind. Just follow this stream about half a mile downstream. Can't miss the cabin." He melted back into the shadows before I could respond. I stood frozen, weighing my options. I was exhausted, injured, and without supplies. Even if I didn't trust this Thomas Blackwell, the idea of shelter was tempting. And if his cabin was only half a mile away, I could always leave if things seemed wrong. I decided to follow the stream as he'd suggested, but to approach the cabin cautiously. The moon provided just enough light to see by as I picked my way along the rocky stream bed. After about 20 minutes, I rounded a bend and saw a small clearing ahead. In it stood a log cabin, light glowing warmly from its windows. It looked so normal, so inviting, that I almost let my guard down. But then I noticed the carvings, the same circular symbols from the forest, etched into the logs along the cabin's foundation. And on the door, carved deep into the wood, was a larger version of the symbol, this one with what looked like a human figure spread-eagled inside the circle. I backed away, but it was too late. The cabin door swung open, and Thomas stood silhouetted against the light. "Decided to take me up on my offer after all?" he called out. Come in, you look half dead." I hesitated, one foot already turned to run. "I'm not going to hurt you, James," he said, his voice gentle. "I just want to talk." He knew my name, just like Agnes had, just like the logbook. "How do you know who I am?" I demanded. Thomas sighed. "Everyone knows who you are. The mountain's been waiting for you." I turned to run, but strong hands grabbed me from behind. I hadn't heard anyone approach, yet suddenly there were two men holding my arms, dragging me toward the cabin. I struggled and shouted, but their grip was like iron. They forced me through the door and into a single room lit by oil lamps. The interior was simple. A wooden table and chairs, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in one corner. But the walls were covered in the same carvings as the trees, hundreds of the circular symbols crowding every available space. And hanging from the ceiling beams were dozens of wooden dolls, each carved in the likeness of a different person. Men, women, even children, all with those terrible empty eye sockets. They swayed slightly in the draft from the open door, like hanged corpses. My captors shoved me into a chair at the table. They were younger men, maybe in their 20s, with the same dark hair and sharp features as Thomas. Family resemblance was clear. Thomas sat across from me, folding his hands on the table. "We've been waiting a long time for you to find your way to us, James. What do you want from me?" My voice cracked with fear. "It's not what we want," said Thomas. "It's what the mountain wants, what Agnes wants." As if summoned by her name, the door opened again and Agnes glided in. In the lamplight she looked even less human, her skin waxy and gray, her movements jerky and unnatural. She carried the broken doll I'd dropped in the clearing. "You ran away," she said, her voice full of quiet menace. "No one runs from the mountain." Thomas looked at her with something like reverence. "Agnes has been the voice of Sullivan Mountain for over 100 years, ever since they took her eyes for seeing too much." "That's impossible," I whispered. "She'd be dead." Agnes laughed, that terrible dry sound. "Oh, I am dead, James. They made sure of that, gouged out my eyes and hanged me from the hemlock tree. But the mountain wouldn't let me rest, not until justice was done." She placed the broken doll on the table between us. "I've been collecting them ever since. The men who hurt women, the men who think they can hide their sins." Her empty eye sockets seemed to fix on me. "Men like you." "I never hurt anyone," I lied, my throat tight with fear. Agnes tilted her head at that impossible angle. "Elizabeth's arm broke in 2 places when you pushed her down the stairs, just like my doll's arm broke when you dropped it." She picked up the severed wooden limb. "But dolls can be fixed. Humans aren't so easy to repair." Thomas stood. "Every year, the mountain calls someone to answer for their sins. This year, it called you." The 2 younger men moved to stand behind me, their hands heavy on my shoulders. "Please," I begged. "I'll do anything. I've learned my lesson." Agnes leaned across the table until her face was inches from mine. I could see into her empty eye sockets, deep and dark as wells. "No, you haven't," she whispered. "But you will." They took my eyes that night. I won't describe the pain or the horror. Some things are better left untold. But I didn't die, as I'd expected to. Instead, they kept me alive, tending my wounds with strange poultices that smelled of earth and blood and something older. In my blindness, I began to hear the mountain. At first, it was just whispers at the edge of my consciousness, then voices, clearer and more insistent, the voices of all those who had come before me, their sins laid bare, their suffering an endless echo through the trees. And finally, the voice of the mountain itself, ancient and patient and hungry. They kept me in the cabin for days, or perhaps weeks. Time lost meaning in the darkness. Sometimes Agnes would sit with me, telling me stories of the others she had taken, of the wooden dolls she had carved in their likeness, of the power their eyes gave her, allowed her to see beyond death. I learned that the Blackwells had been the keepers of Agnes's legacy for generations, helping her collect those the mountain called. Thomas was her great-great-nephew, descended from the brother who had tried and failed to save her from the mob that took her eyes and her life. On what they told me was the last night of October. Samhain, Agnes called it, the night when the veil between worlds was thinnest. They took me back to the hemlock clearing. I couldn't see, but I could feel the massive presence of the tree, could hear the whispers of the dolls they hung from its branches. "The mountain has judged you," Agnes told me, "but it's also shown mercy, more than you showed Elizabeth." They left me there, alone in the darkness with only a small pack of supplies and a walking stick. Agnes's final words still ring in my ears. "Find your way home, James Anderson. And if you do, remember what the mountain has taught you. Your eyes may be gone, but now, perhaps, you'll truly see." I don't know how I survived. I followed streams, felt my way along tree trunks, stumbled and crawled when I had to. I ate what they had left me in the pack, and when that ran out, I chewed on roots and bark that Agnes had shown me how to identify by touch and taste. After an eternity of darkness, I heard voices, normal, human voices, and cried out with what little strength I had left. Hikers found me, barely alive, at the edge of the forest near the World's End State Park overlook, miles from where I'd entered the woods. The official report says I was attacked by an animal, perhaps a bear. My eyes, the doctors told me, were damaged beyond repair. No one believed my stories of Agnes and the Blackwells and the Hungry Mountain. They found no cabin, no carved trees, no wooden dolls. They attributed my tale to trauma and exposure. But sometimes in my dreams, I still hear the whispers from Sullivan Mountain. And sometimes when I'm alone, I feel Agnes's presence, watching me with eyes that once were mine. Elizabeth came to see me in the hospital. She held my hand as I told her everything, not just about Agnes and the mountain, but about the kind of man I had been, the kind of husband. For the first time, I truly apologized for what I had done to her. She visits me now sometimes. She says she's forgiven me, though I don't deserve it. She reads to me and helps me learn to navigate my new, darkened world. I don't know if Sullivan Mountain and Agnes Blackwell were real, or if they were manifestations of my own guilt made flesh. Perhaps my mind created them to punish me for what I'd done. But I know this: there are places in this world where the old powers still dwell, places that know our sins better than we know ourselves. And if you go to the Loyalsock State Forest, if you hike the trails near Sullivan Mountain, listen carefully to the whispers in the hemlock trees. They might be calling your name next.